Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement Psyborg Fighter Subclass, designed by Anthony Joyce for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, and Will, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos David Vicente Gilberto, Sean aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Alkshi. Thank you all very much for your support. Fighters, not the most exciting D&D class. A lot of people like fighters. 5th edition with the new, what do they call them, subclass, I guess subclasses, or class archetypes. Fighters kind of got the shaft, again, unfortunately. Everybody chooses Battlemaster, that's just the one to do it. And Battlemaster's fun, it gives you, dice to roll, and it's got different abilities you can do, and different moves, and it's the one you choose if you're playing a fighter. Let me know in the comments if you have for any reason, ever chosen anything other than Battlemaster for your fighter. I'm very curious about that, because I think, in my experience, it's always been Battlemaster or bust. So I like the fact that we're getting a cool fighter subclass here. Cybernetics, obviously, is not something that's really a part of D&D. D&D tends to be very medieval, Tolkienist, high fantasy based. I like cyberpunk stuff a lot. I'm trying to think. I'm a big fan of the Deus Ex games. I think would be the biggest example of recent years, at least the recent Square Enix games, which were really cool. Just first-person, RPGs that had cybernetics as your skill tree, and it was a lot of fun being able to do those different moves. So I do think cybernetics can be applied, to any RPG very, very well. And those of you that have been following my channel for a while know that I actually started DMing with Shadowrun, which obviously cybernetics is a big part of Shadowrun. It is not a class per se, it's just one of the things that you can buy and slot into your body or onto your body or replace with a limb on your body. It has an interesting system there with kind of balancing the fact that you will become shittier at casting spells because you're less in tune with your humanity or something. But there is some kind of a cost with that. So here, the designer has attempted to translate cybernetics, and it's PSY, that's the big joke. It's all psychic ability because technically, the technology isn't quite there yet, although it kind of is, you can tell by the artwork here. But it draws in different elements, and it even mentions in the guide about like Dwergar, and they're more about metalworking and more willing to replace their own body parts with, technology. We could call it high technology. Illithids are kind of an alien race, so there's different backgrounds and different elements you can use to introduce this very exotic subclass. When it comes down to it, it's basically a fighter with sorcerer spells and warlock invocations. After I've looked through it, that is basically what's being done here. Now that's kind of a complaint. The positive is that it does feel fairly well balanced. Nothing is too crazy. Like you picture, like, oh, I don't want to introduce cybernetics to my D&D campaign. I don't want one player to be able to shoot a rocket launcher out of their shoulder or have the Mega Man style gun or be able to have, Iron Man flying or all that. That's going to be way too crazy. And I agree, that would be just broken in a lot of ways. But instead, I think it's gone back a little bit towards the other way, and it just becomes a little not quite as exciting as I was hoping, I guess, in terms of the actual way that it operates. And maybe that's a testament to how well the D&D classes are built, where you can really just translate any of their abilities and functions and give them different themes. And it really feels like a lot of the cybernetics are very close to warlock invocations in the fact that you can select which module you want and plunk that in, and that kind of has those same kind of effects. So it's well balanced in that way. Nothing is too crazy. On the other hand, nothing other than a few of the spells, nothing feels super original or incredibly like jaw-droppingly clever. That was like, oh yeah, this really feels like cybernetics. So let's jump into it. And by the way, this says the heir of Orcus. That only pertains to the fact that the author designs these other adventures that have this kind of retro video game inspired look and feel and art to them. Otherwise, it doesn't have anything to do with that actual campaign. So if you're wondering if this is like a supplement to that campaign specifically, no, this is a completely separate release. Anybody who's playing the fighter can use it. It's just built for any 5th edition fighter campaign. So you don't need the Heir of Orcus. That just kind of tells you that this is part of the designer's portfolio of that kind of style and artwork, which I was hoping that we would get a really fun, inventive style of subclass or character class that would take advantage of the fact that it's very retro video game inspired. And I saw this artwork and I was like, yes, this is going to be great. There's going to be like this old school skill tree and I have this little art and everything. And we didn't get that. It's so disappointing. We got this little art, and that's almost the only piece of art in the entire thing. And otherwise, it's very much written and designed like a normal D&D supplement, which is fine. You know, it's got the tables, it's got the the correct font, I guess you could say, and all that. White text is kind of a bummer, although it's got this nice little binding at the edge graphics. But I was just hoping that we might get a little bit more interesting and fancy with the layout, just because I really do like the way the Heir of Orcus is done. I reviewed that, by the way. You can look up that review. It's very much this retro, like literally pixelated graphics and all these things, which I think there's an artwork right here. A lot of indie video games do this style too, which I really am a fan of this style, and I was hoping to get more of that translated into how this new class operated. Instead, it really plays it safe and just kind of does just kind of a normal layout of how everything is done, which again is fine. I was just hoping to get something a little more fancier and more exciting and original. So at 3rd level, a fighter can become a cybernetic warrior. There are different flavorful ways for this to happen. You can be a test subject of an illithid. You can have nightmares of Dwerger. But either way, you end up getting these cybernetic implants. It even mentions, like, this is basically just narrative, however you want to install these things in there, which, a lot of DMs would be like, well, wait, where did you suddenly get a cybernetic arm from? So it seems like a tricky thing to just, you can flavor that, like, oh, my warrior has, studied the blade for this many, long, so now that I reach 3rd level, I become a battle master. That makes sense. But it's not like, oh, I've thought about cybernetics a lot, and at 3rd level, I suddenly have a, magical, technological respirator on my mouth and a laser eye and a cyborg arm. Like that gets a little trickier, and even mentions there are different things. I do like the Wounded Warrior one. You sustain a grievous injury, rush to a nearby Dwerger medical facility where they conducted a life-saving operation. You were saved, but forever changed in the process. RoboCop, basically, which I like that. I think that's a cool thing for any character to go through. I like that archetype of, or the Darth Vader thing, really, if you want to go back to that. So it's a little stranger on how to become this, but otherwise you just basically choose it at 3rd level. And you gain sorcerer spells. Pretty much at I want to say like a ranger or I just mind blanked out. Ranger, what's the other one that's half? Is Bard? No, I think Bard's a full caster now. But you get spells at not quite a full caster, but definitely as a supplement. More so than a warlock, I would say, although warlock's a little funkier with the short rest thing. You get cantrips. You get your spells known, which works pretty much exactly like a warlock does, and everything is based on your charisma. So I hope you built your fighter with charisma, which is, I think the other spellcasting fighter I believe is intelligence based. So here's your charisma, and hey, you could even multi-class into sorcerer later and be even more crazy or powerful. I think. You gain augmentations, basically, is why you take this class. You get sorcerer spells and you get augmentations, which augmentations are essentially like warlock invocations, as I mentioned in the beginning. You get to select them at different levels. You gain your first one at 3rd level, an additional one at 7th, then 10th, 15th, and 18th level. And each one offers different bonuses. A lot of them do have to do with making melee attacks, which is cool. I think that is more flavorful to the fact that it is a fighter subclass, so you can do a psionic kick or a psionic boom. There's defensive ones for a lot of them. Mind shield. Psionic weapon is literally just the warlock hex blade, I think it's called, where you can use a weapon that you can manifest anywhere and become bonded to, which I think the fighter already has one like that, right? It's the one where you can be magically bonded to a weapon. Although I don't know if that one you can actually manifest. I think that one you just can like do the force thing and put it in your hand. But I mean, it's cool. That's very flavorful, and I think that's really neat. You can see here a little graphic depiction of maybe what that would look like. You can communicate mentally with another creature within 60 feet. Again, a lot of these are very much Warlock inspired. Respiratory implant allows you to breathe normally underwater. They're very, very useful. They do require prerequisites, similar to how the invocations work, where some of them might have level prerequisites. I don't think any of them are very high level, though. They're either first level or seventh level, from what I can tell. So there's not really any like super big high level broken augmentations, which is interesting. Even though you get them at certain intervals, you can just kind of stack more of them. There are ones that upgrade, though. Obviously, Psionic Weapon 1, Psionic Weapon 2, and Psionic Weapon 3, which basically gives you a built-in Divine Smite, which is very useful for anybody that's played a Paladin, or like me, played a cheesy Warlock Paladin that had Divine Smites on their Hexblade weapon. They do seem pretty cool. None of them are... I mean, they are flavored very well. It's just funny how much you can... And maybe that's a testament to how well the D&D spells and things work, and it's very moddable in that you can look at something and be like, okay, I know like this was drawn exactly from this Warlock invocation. You know, you can choose one of the following spells: Disguise Self, Expeditious Retreat, False Life, Featherfall, Jump, Mage Armor, or Silent Image. Cast it once as a first level spell without using a spell slot. That wraps up a bunch of different Warlock invocations, which are just giving you a spell. Again, they communicate telepathically. That's something a lot of Warlocks can do just built in. The advantage on con saving throws against airborne poisons. It's the respiratory. You've got the Bane mask on. They're neat ideas. None of them are particularly just mind-blowing, but it's very cool for a fighter. What I did like is how it uses hit dice as a resource, and I think that's a good way of using the fact that you're using your own body as your power source. And I don't think, seen any other ability in D&D ever that uses hit dice as a expendable resource other than you short rest and you can heal via hit dice, which, if you know, it's possible you could spend an entire campaign and never use hit dice if you don't really short rest very much. I know when we played Storm King's Thunder, it was long rest all the time because it's all kinds of overland battles, and the very few dungeons we were in, you might get off like one short rest every once in a while. And then if you're not injured, you don't really even need to use your hit dice. So it really depends on how the campaign is balanced, depending on how much hit dice you're using. But at third level, you can overcharge your cybernetic implants by using hit dice to regain a spell slot, which is very, very cool. Again, that seems very abusable, especially if you end up multiclassing into Sorcerer, but I like the fact that you are using hit dice. I think that's very thematic to a cybernetically enhanced being. And then there's another way you can use it later. Where did I see that one? Hit dice, process action. When you spend one hit dice in the process, at 15th level, you can overload your cybernetic implants to where any spell you cast is cast at one spell higher, which again is a very cool and flavorful thing to do. So I do like the way it uses hit dice quite a bit. I think that's clever. And then we get a bunch of spells, because you get more spells. Essentially, so already you can tell where I came up with the fact that you're a fighter / sorcerer / warlock when you take this archetype, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just funny how it was very easily translatable to those particular classes. But what I was really impressed that you do get a lot of new spells. 40, I believe. 40 new spells the designer has provided. They are all sorcerer spells, but several of them can also be put into other class spells: Bard, Cleric, Wizard, Druid, and Ranger, and Paladin, just depending on if they're flavorful for that kind of class. So Paladin's a lot of the kind of buffing spells, Clerics have a lot of supports, Bards have the kind of illusionary spells, things like that. They all work very, very well. And here is where, again, some of them are literally just rejiggered versions of, spells that you already know, just themed slightly differently, whereas others, you could create a jump pad, which reminds me of Mega Man, Arcane Springboard. There's cat feet, which is really funny. You can land on your feet. A lot of these are just reflavored, but some of them are very, very cool. And in fact, a lot of the cantrips, if anything, I was really impressed with how useful these cantrips are. For cat feet, as a reaction, when you would take damage from falling, you can just gain resistance to damage from falling. So just take half damage. As long as you have that cantrip and you have a reaction available, you can always take half damage from falling. And if you fall less than 30 feet, you could land on your feet instead of prone. That's really amazing. Because a lot of cantrips, just not that useful at all when you think about like Blade Ward and all those. But some of these are very, very, very useful. I enjoyed seeing these a lot. Um, where's it? Launch ammunition was a great cantrip. This is a good example of one that is feels very flavorful to being a cybernetic warrior. You touch a piece of ammunition, instantly make a weapon attack with it as if you were attacking with a weapon that is normally used to fire that type of ammunition. So essentially, as long as you have that piece of ammo, you can make an attack as if you were firing that weapon. Now, that's a complicated way of saying, okay, you're putting a bunch of arrows in your hand and you're shooting them off like a missile launcher. That's basically what you're doing, except you're using the stats of a longbow and you don't need the longbow. And I thought that was a really clever way, carefully worded to make it like, no, you don't have a missile launcher, but you basically have a missile launcher. It still follows the longbow rules. It's not in any way overpowered or crazy, except it does scale up in level, which is interesting, as spell's damage increases when you reach higher levels. So at 5th level, you can deal an extra 1d4 force damage, and it scales up a little bit from there, so that's pretty cool. But I just think that's a neat way of, yes, you're just re-flavoring something, but I think it's a delicious flavor. But I do like these spells for the most part. I think there's some good stuff in here. Magnetism is, you could say it's a very long spell, but it's got a fun way of being able to disarm people or even pull people to you. Or even be able to pull constructs to you, which involves a lot of strength checks, which is what all these paragraphs are about. But that also feels very, very cool. And you can just picture a lot of these cybernetic abilities that you would be able to unleash, and they make sense for the most part. It's really cool that we get 40 freaking spells of these versions. I'm not sure if I was a DM if I would allow all of them just at once, because it's a lot of new spells, but I think I would flavor it like maybe you could, well, I guess you're only choosing a couple, aren't you? And yeah, you only have 3 or 4 or 5 spells known, so it probably wouldn't break it up too much, but I think it'd be pretty cool if you could only choose these spells if you chose this class, this subclass, because that would be very appropriate to you. Just being able to use spells that are very, using your technological advantage in a lot of ways, which, it's that famous quote about the advanced enough technology is indistinguishable from magic. Kind of same thing here. You can, I've got special brain thing that lets me scan and figure out the emotions of my enemies, or I've got this eyeball that lets me read, the targets of where to properly hit somebody to do the most damage, and all these things. They're basically spells, but that's kind of what advanced technology really is is just spells. So I think it's cool. I think it's really cool that we got all these spells. They are very flavorful, and I think it's a fun, interesting class that helps the fighter. I almost wish that this was either its own class or was just a thing that any character could do, and not necessarily have it be balanced as a subclass. Because, again, thinking like in Shadowrun or something else, it's not like you choose the cybernetic class. That's just a thing that anybody can do, but it's balanced versus you not being able... I think everybody has a certain threshold. Like, you can only have so many enhancements, and then the more that you have, the less capable you are of casting magic. To the point where I think if you have enough cybernetic enhancements, you can't do any magic at all, and you've got penalties to anything involving magic. So I almost would have liked to see that be used rather than have it be specifically just like a fighter-only subclass, because there's really no reason lore-wise why only fighters would have access to cybernetic implants. Just nothing at all, other than I guess it's just easier to do a subclass than it is a full class. And if it were a full class, I'd have the same kind of argument. Well, like, why is this somebody's, like, I think of a class as like their profession, essentially. Are you a ranger? Are you a cleric? Are you a thief? Or a rogue? Why? It's like, I'm a cyborg. It's not really, you can be a cybernetically enhanced ranger, a cybernetically enhanced cleric, or a cybernetically enhanced fighter. So it's weird to see that this is just a subclass. I think it is very well done, but if I were to introduce cybernetics in this way into my D&D campaign, I would rather have it be where everybody has access to them, but they come with some kind of cost and penalty association. I mean, I like what they add here in terms of the invocations, that each one has an associated invocation with it. I think that's pretty cool. But I would honestly probably look more at like Shadowrun and see how they do their cybernetics rather than making it a subclass. But if you're going to make it a subclass, I think this is probably how you do it. Let's go over my quick pros and cons. It's a very, very short DM's Guild product. Pros, it's a well-balanced subclass that gives the fighter spells and spell-like abilities. Anything that makes the fighter more exciting is okay by me, as I think fighters are boring. Sorry, fighter fans. I know y'all are great. You keep the rest of us alive. I appreciate it. But it's pretty rare when you see a pure fighter these days, and for good reason. But this makes the fighter pretty fun. It's a neat subclass. Pros, 15 cybernetic augmentations, which are all pretty cool, and 40 psychic spells, which are, for the most part, interesting and cool. Some of them are just reflavored other spells, but you get 40 of them. That's a lot of great spells. Cons, the Psyborg is basically just a fighter with sorcerer spells and warlock invocations. I hate to make that a big con because I do think that creates a well-balanced class and is probably the right way to do it. It just doesn't quite feel as original, as interesting as I was expecting. And again, maybe that's partly the fault of the D&D classes and features themselves as being so easily moddable to be turned into different things. You know, invocations, yeah, you could easily turn an invocation into a cybernetic implant. That's probably how I would do it. So if I was designing it, it's like, well, just look at these invocations and see how that flavors it. But it doesn't quite feel as, having read through all those and played through a lot of those subclasses, this really feels like you're just kind of combining like two other class features into a third class. Maybe that's a little too powerful and too much. The other con, very little artwork, and I really love the artwork here particularly. Normally, I might not even make a con about that because, again, this is just a class, a single class thing. But I love the style of the Heir of Orcus stuff with the very retro pixelated art stuff. Just looks fantastic, and it's a bummer that there's you can see here, none of that has any artwork, which is a big bummer because I love the artwork here. Final verdict, Psyborg Fighter Subclass smartly adapts cyberpunk features to D&D appropriate spells and abilities. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.